Welcome to today's broadcast of North Idaho College Public Forum. The crew is comprised of NIC television students, and your moderator is North Idaho College political scientist Tony Stewart.
I welcome you to the sixth and final week of our series entitled Conflict, Hostility, or Harmony. I'm sure a number of our viewers have been watching over these weeks as we've dealt with this subject, and for those of you who have not, I will review for a moment what we've been doing during the 6-week period. At North Idaho College, we put on a symposium, as I indicated, called Conflict, Hostility, or Harmony, and we chose 4 sub-areas to look at. We've talked about the problems of crime in our society and the conflict that arises among individuals that results in crime. We've also looked at the family and the conflicts that take place inside families within our country. And third, we looked into education and conflicts that we find there. And finally, in the field of religion. Following those 4 weeks of analyzing those subjects with national and international experts that you have seen on this program, last week we took some members of the panel that had been involved with the symposium and got their view. We'd like to finish the 6-week program by welcoming to our program Jennifer Johnson, and I want to publicly thank her for being so active in this symposium all week. She is here today in her capacity as a member of the Conflict Resolution Center in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and her center has been helping us and assisting by being at tables and passing out literature and participating in the response panels. And I also want to say that a very active member of the Conflict Resolution Center, Sue Flamia, who's an attorney in Coeur d'Alene, was responsible really for suggesting this subject, and we're grateful to them. Jennifer Johnson, as I indicated, is with the center. She's active in other things in our community. And Jennifer, may I start by thanking you for being with us today and for your participation in the symposium.
You're very welcome.
I want to really break the program into 2 parts, if I may. I want to take advantage of the fact that you have been listening to our guest speakers and going to response panels, and I want to talk with you, just a dialogue back and forth between us about the reaction to some of the issues that came up during the symposium. And number 2, I really want to give some attention to the Conflict Resolution Center, and I'll have some questions to ask about where you're located and what you do and how you serve the public. But first, let's talk about the symposium. Would you give us some of your views on what you think has been emphasized the most or most important with the symposium for the people of our area, both here on campus and in our community and via television?
Well, that's kind of hard to take an entire week of information that we've been given and pick one important element. I think each speaker offered something different and valuable. The entire theme, of course, was where does conflict and the resolution of conflict outside of our traditional areas enter into our community? In the areas of crime, the statistics were frightening. Coeur d'Alene is an isolated area, kind of a community that is very different from someplace like Los Angeles or Seattle or New York. So we may look at the problems presented and say, well, that doesn't really touch us, but the implication is that it does touch us. If our attempts to deal with crime and people that are caught up in crime and the solution to those aren't handled, we're going to feel the side effects hitting our community, and we're going to be impacted as much as the larger areas, larger communities. Dr. Haynes spoke on the second day, and he gave some real concrete ways, 12 points specifically within his talk, that we can effectively deal with conflict that actually results in a solution, not just band-aiding each problem as it arises. Now, all across our country, we have groups that are implementing education programs within the school that deal with teaching students themselves, starting with our kids at a young age. Such an exciting concept. And they take these kids and they teach them the skills necessary to successfully solve a problem between themselves. They give them the communication skills, they give them the techniques, and then instead of a principal or a teacher or a playground duty dictating an imperative saying you will apologize for that action, or you will be suspended, or you will be disciplined, you will stay after school and write this on the board, etc. What we're seeing is, instead of just a punishment for punishment's sake in an attempt to deter it, we're giving the kids an opportunity to solve their own problems so that there is an ultimate solution. That hits within the education. Within the education area, our speaker talked about the fact that our country is changing demographically. We are having immigrants move in, we're having people of different color, different races, different beliefs, and we are all of a sudden back to the original melting pot, only we are melting large varieties of cultures together. And we can either fight against that, or her suggestion was we can begin to work through the education system, and we can begin to mix and match and meld together and create a new. You know, instead of staying with the old, she said, if we stay with the old methods, that's going to spell destruction for our system and our society as we know it. We have to incorporate, and we have to marry the old and the new and come out with something better. And she again said, let's do it through education. Let's, you know, I guess, keep what we have and add to it. Then we dealt with religion, and that's always that's always an area that creates a tremendous amount of strife, and a lot of dissension and a lot of absolutes. And people's whole foundation for their life many times is based on their religious philosophies. And how can we generate tolerance through creatively resolving conflict? Not using the old traditional methods, but trying something new. One of the newest that is now abounding is mediation. And that is where we teach people the skills to solve their own problems. We give them the ability to communicate. We enable them. There's another term that's familiar in the area, is we empower them. And that's simply saying, you as a person have valid ideas. You have a basic desire to solve a conflict, and you don't need a third party to do it for you. You need to learn effective methods for solving your own. And that's what a mediator does. He effectively tries to teach others how to solve their own problems.
It's so good to have you on this program, because you have been here all week and you have done a very fine job of emphasizing the key issues in each of those days and what we've done, and also on this program. If you don't mind, I'd like to go back, now that you've given us that overview in such an excellent way, and ask a couple of specific questions about each speaker and what they said. Dr. Ron Markman has a remarkable background, as our viewers know. He's an attorney, a medical doctor, a psychiatrist, a specialist in neurology, testified on a lot of major cases in this country. But he told me he would be controversial, and he was, and there was a reaction by the panel, there was a reaction by the audience. And I'm just going to get into one area because time will not permit all of those areas. But I got the impression from him that he felt that there were a number of reasons for rising crime in this country, but he kept coming back to the idea that single-parent families, or the breakup of marriages, was a real problem, and that created a lot of reaction on campus to his comments. I want to give you the opportunity to respond as to your position, or for you who are involved in conflict resolution. Is he dealing with something that is a legitimate point, or is he overlooking some other things that cause a lot of the conflict that leads to crime?
I think his story that he gave about asking 3 different men who were standing at 3 different points of an elephant and asking them to describe that elephant is appropriate here. It's a multi-dimensional problem. And to pick one element and focus on that one element and say, this is the cause, and if we solve that, we've solved the rest of the problem, would be a far too simplistic approach for the problem. The man standing at the tail of the elephant would describe a different aspect of the elephant than the man standing at the trunk or standing at the tusk. They're all feeling the elephant, but their descriptions sound totally diverse. It doesn't sound as if there's any common ground when the 3 try to describe that elephant. And I think to assign the breakdown of the family as a key element in the rise in crime, I think is too simplified. I think it's a key aspect. I think it's one. I don't know if it's the tusk, I don't know if it's the tail, or the trunk. I don't know. I'm not an expert in the area.
But it's only one part of the elephant.
But it's just one part of the elephant, and that elephant is really big. Mm-hmm. I come from a family that is in the minority. I come from an intact family with a husband and a wife and 2 children, not 2.3. And I like it that way. I like the security that we can offer our children. I like the way my children are turning out so far. I'm very pleased with their sense of balance and their sense of security. And it grieves my heart to go into the schools where I spend a lot of time and see the children that do not have that opportunity. But I'm not going to say that they will not achieve the same amount of success and happiness within their lives because they don't have two parents in the home than my children are. There's no guarantee of that.
Dr. John Haynes on the second day, and I know that from what your comments were that you were very impressed with him, as many of us were, and he was the one person who came that's had the most experience with mediation. And one of the points he made, and I want to get your reaction to that, was that in dealing with families and divorce, which he spends much of his time in, that he felt that that was really a problem of putting that through litigation, which happens so often. And I know earlier, before we started the show, you talked about his comment on taking a social issue and putting it into a legal context. Would you react to his comments in that area?
Okay. If you get into something like battering or abuse or something like that, I believe that belongs in the legal system for the protection of the individuals involved. When it comes down to parenting, I find that I do agree with him. A judge is not more qualified to tell me, should my husband and I choose to split up, a judge is not more qualified to tell me or my husband or us as a twosome how to raise our children. We really are the only two that should be responsible for that. And we are the ones that are going to be implementing that parenting. So to have a third party say, you will do this, 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 and this, and we sanction or do not sanction this approach, I believe is they're out of their jurisdiction. So I think if the parties can be brought through mediation willingly, and mediation suggests, just in the nature of mediation, that it's two parties that choose to come of their own volition. Right there that says, we would like to come to an agreement. We would like to solve this problem. If you have one that refuses to come, you have no choice but to go through the courts at that point. But if you have two parents that say, well, we are willing to try mediation and see if we can work this out, that's the first step. You've got them up at the plate. They're ready to take a swing at it. So I think if we can keep it within the parent, keep the parents in control of their parenting, because they are the implementers. And they're ultimately the ones the children are going to deal with, then more power to our society.
Cherry McGee Banks the next day was another eloquent speaker, and she talked about education, she said, from the issue of multicultural issues, and particularly curriculum and great need for change. And she had a lot of statistics that indicate that people of color are increasing in the total population of many parts of the country of school districts, and at the same time the number of people of color who are teaching are going to be declining according to statistics. So more and more children of color are in settings where they do not have someone from their own race or ethnic background as in role modeling as far as teaching is concerned. And she also talked about the lack of recognition of the role of women and people of color in the history, although they've been vital part of the whole process, it's just not being recognized in the curriculum. And from that I got a very clear picture that will cause increased conflict in education if we do not address that problem. First of all, it's unfair to those who have contributed to society not to recognize that contribution. But secondly, there is conflict comes out of that, and lack of communication, identification. Would you respond as to how you think that from her speech that we should address that issue?
Well, she spoke very specifically towards the point that most of our literature and what we teach and what the children read and what they come across is Euro-Anglo influenced, okay? And everything is white, and much of our literature is still his, although we've changed to, or him, although we've changed to he, her, using additional genders. I got the feeling that what she was saying is that we need to more broadly base our approach to educating children and say there isn't just one culture, there isn't just one way, that a part of your world includes the rest of the world. We are no longer isolated. We're one big picture instead of little teeny pieces of the whole. And I got the impression that her focus should be that in teaching children and dealing with them, we needed to deal on a level that they could understand cross-culturally. We needed to say, there are other cultures and this is what they offer, and they're good. And they're part of your world, and you need to be familiar with them so that when you are out beyond Coeur d'Alene, you are not taken by surprise at the differences you find, that you are adaptable. And I think that was somebody, I don't know which speaker, used the word adaptability. Have I answered your question?
Yes, you certainly have.
Okay.
Very well. Dr. John Roth, who's Carnegie's Professor of the Year in 1988 in Canada and the United States, all of these people had very impressive credentials, is an expert on philosophy and religion. He teaches that at Claremont McKinney College in California. He, I thought, did a very outstanding job of giving us the historical perspective for religions, particularly the development of Judaism and then the Christian religion. And I guess one of the points I'd like to get you to react to, because it certainly impacted on me as he addressed the audience, and that has to do with the fact that in many religions, as they have developed through time, they have taught an absolutism, that the only way to make it in both this world and the next world, particularly the next world, is to believe in the totality of that dogma or principles at the exclusion of other religions' dogma. And from that has come, in his thesis, not only great intolerance, but has resulted in lots of violence, killing people in the name of saving them through the death of the person, and therefore obviously really explains a lot of our symposium topic, conflict. Do you also agree with this thesis, Dr. Ross?
I believe that religion has created a great deal of intolerance. You know, you look at the Christian Crusades, you can go back through history and find that at the basis of a lot of wars there was a religious belief and a dogma, and they were bound and determined to either force their belief onto somebody else or wipe them out if they chose not to believe that. He referred, you know, to some scriptural background, and one of the things that struck me in listening to him was the fact that Christ never preached intolerance. What he did, and you can look at all the examples of the different people and the variety of segments of society that he interacted with, and where the Pharisees and the religious leaders of that day were hooked on dogma, and they were stuck on the rules and the regulations, and by no means were they going to bend in such a way as the rules and the regulations were no longer there to serve the people, but to be served. And I think that fits with his whole thesis. Christ came, you know, as a result of that, and he said, first and foremost, love God. Second of all, love people as much as you love yourself, you know, and treat them accordingly. And I think in getting caught up in the side issues of dogma and rules and regulations that go along with a belief, we have forgotten that basic message.
Dr. Roth is a very religious man,
yes,
and he's very active in his church. And so he wasn't critical of the institution of religion, he was critical of how some religions have reacted toward others. Mm-hmm. I think we could conclude this part by making the point, again, at least I was very impressed with his comment when he said that an individual can belong to an organized religion and believe the dogma with great dedication, but understanding that while doing that, recognizing and respecting the right of another person to have a different dogma and religion. And if you can do that, you can go down that path. Mm-hmm. Without an absolutism that demands that everyone come in under the same umbrella that you're under. Mm-hmm. I guess that as we've gone through these four areas that we've dealt with, that I'd like to ask you an overall question, then I want to get into some things on the Conflict Resolution Center in Coeur d'Alene. I'm still processing this week, and you and I are doing this show at the last day of the symposium, so we haven't had any time to reflect upon it. But Jennifer, how would you react to this comment? It seems to me that one thing that came out this week quite clearly was that the first step is that we have to understand the problems. Mm-hmm. We have to understand that we may look at those from a different eyes and from a different viewpoint, but that we have to give some historical perspective to all of this. And then secondly, once that's happened, accept the idea that people are going to be different in how they perceive a number of issues, and knowing that we are going to have some conflicts because of that. And that it seemed to me that the week was concluding that we're not going to eliminate conflict among the human race. But what we need to learn to do is find a better way to deal with those conflicts, the resolution of those conflicts. Did you get some similar ideas from that symposium?
Oh, definitely. Conflict isn't, you know, we've been taught over the years, I think, that conflict is bad. And I know that any number of times I can remember myself kind of rubbing my temples and saying, I hate conflict, I hate conflict. And a lot of it was because Many times the conflict continued. There was not a resolution. There was not a solution. And I couldn't figure out how to get through it. So I simply lived with it, and I did my best to avoid it, to dance around it, to, once in a while take it head on, and then reel from the impact of it. The symposium this week left, I think, everybody with the idea that conflict has its place. It results in growth. It results in change. In and of itself, it's not bad. What's bad is if we beat ourselves up over it, if we don't come up with effective means of solving it and using it, as a dynamic force to propel us forward, rather than as something that holds us, in a detrimental position.
And certainly the first day of our symposium illustrated that is, if we cannot cope with conflict and we get totally angry and frustrated and we use the most objectionable method of all, that is violence, that we turn to violence and crime, then we have really failed at resolution of conflict. Or even if the resolution is that one of the parties in the conflict dies in that violence, there may be an end of conflict between those two persons, but that's an unacceptable resolution. So it seems that the way to deal with it is a very different method, and I think that some of the people who are involved with us here and other places are on the cutting edge of this new approach. And so let's move to the Conflict Resolution Center. The one in Coeur d'Alene has been going for some time. There's one opening up, or has opened up, in Spokane. I've said several times this week that Boise, Idaho, we want to come in. The people there, they're way ahead of us in this process because they have gone through the discussions and now they've gone through a lot of training. Would you kindly describe how the Conflict Resolution Center is organized in Coeur d'Alene? Is it in parts? I know one area that you're dealing with is in the field of education with conflict. That's a very involved question, but just take us through what the center is all about.
Okay, it opened its doors in 1989, totally under volunteer of resources, volunteer of space, volunteer of time of community members. Sylvia Geddes, she's a local attorney here in town, was the one who conceived this idea. Feeling that our litigation system and the time that it took, the expense, sometimes just was not necessary, that there were other ways, but people didn't recognize that they had other choices, or they didn't have the skills to seek those other ways. She, Sue Flamia, Heidi Fisher, Jim Top, who's a psychologist with the school district, Coeur d'Alene School District, some of the people involved in the social health and welfare areas of our community are involved. There's quite a list of members of the board. Anybody within the community who has an interest in seeing this idea propelled and expanded in our community can join the board. In fact, we are looking for additional people, because the more areas of the community that we are drawing from, the quicker the information and the availability of what's taking place at the center will finger its way through our community. The focus at this point, and from the time at which they opened, has been up to this time, child custody and divorce cases. For those people who are willing and feel that maybe with direction and with the help of a neutral third party can somehow put together their own parenting agreement, are coming to the center and having their divorces or their child custody situations mediated. Again, you have to have two parties that agree to attend the mediation, and that's in the best interests of what their children can look forward to. We do have mediators on the center board that are qualified to handle employee-employer relations, neighborhood disputes, I believe juvenile justice for petty situations, although the diversion board handles that, are also in place. And we draw from people throughout the community, everything from educators and psychologists to social workers, lawyers, to just people like myself who are parents interested in a change in their community.
For those who want to get a pencil or a piece of paper, I'm going to give them your address and your telephone number, and that's one of our public services, because as people are facing conflict, and if they've reached that point to where they'd like to lessen that conflict and not go through some of the things that are very harmful physically and mentally and financially, there's a possibility that you could be of service. You certainly can tell them where you could or could not. At this time, I will do that for our viewers. The Conflict Resolution Center in Coeur d'Alene is located at 410 Sherman Avenue, Suite 216, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and that is 83814. The telephone number at the center is area code 208 664-9448. If anyone failed to get that, they could contact me here on the public forum at North Idaho College, and we'll pass on that information to them.
The center is also in the yellow pages of the phone book.
Very good. But some of our viewers, even from other places, might want to check in with you, or might be interested in starting a center in their community, and you could provide them some, I'm sure, good information. One thing that I think that in networking is so important is that we don't reinvent the wheel over and over.
Yes.
Also, when you take on a case through the center, let us suppose it is dealing with a family dispute, divorce, and child custody. Could you tell us how you do that? I know you have attorneys involved, and that's why you can deal with also the legal aspects, but suppose I came to you and say I was getting a divorce, and my spouse was coming too. We'd agreed to do this. And I know that's the first point. You have to have both parties. What would you tell us? How would you go about the process?
Well, first of all, let me clarify. My training for mediation is in the area of special education disputes. Okay, I have not been trained for divorce and child custody, and that requires a whole another area. There are some areas of mediation that are generic as far as the styles and techniques with which you use. I would make sure that they understood the process of mediation is one thing. We do have a videotape available, and we do at the center intend on purchasing more that actually do deal with introducing mediation, what the process is, what some of the techniques involved, what the responsibility of each of the parties is. The mediator is a neutral, non-biased third party that is simply, probably the best way to describe it, acts as a catalyst, comes together with two people and enables those people through creative questioning, laying the ground rules for beginning to open the lines of communication, clarifying things, keeping the issue that is at hand the sole issue that you deal with, not allowing lots of other things to come in, which is an automatic tendency. They act as a catalyst, and the two people are the ones that actually come up with the agreement that they can mutually live with. It's a win-win situation. You don't walk away with one person who's won and one who's lost. I heard at one training session, a loser is never done. So when you go through the courts and you have a winner and you have a loser, that loser is going to continue to seek what they believe to be justice. The idea is that both parties come together, they create their own agreement, they own their agreement because they are the authors of it.
And that's so important because the mediator makes sure that if it's successful, that happens rather than being something arbitrarily directed to them. And we're going to close out the program, is right now over, but I just think the mediator plays that very, very important role of getting them to work out their own agreement and keeping them on course and not off on some other issues until they can reach that conclusion. Jennifer, I thank you so much for being on this program and for helping us all week. You've been a great, great assistance to us and most articulate, and I know our viewers have benefited by this entire series and today's program too.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Ladies and gentlemen, our guest has been Jennifer Johnson, who is from the Coeur d'Alene Conflict Resolution Center. We hope you've enjoyed this 6-week series. I'd like to invite you to be with us again next week on a different subject. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
North Idaho College Public Forum can be seen at the same time each week over this station. This production was videotaped earlier by an NIC student crew for viewing at this more appropriate time.